And it's Jerry Ashton with WGRNradio.com, 15 Minutes of Fact. And as always, provocative. It's going to raise questions. It's going to provide answers. And almost all of what we do at 15 Minutes of Fact is centered around the Occupy movement. Most recently, taking the headlines, for example, has been what is called OccupySandy. It's gotten so much attention, and throngs of not only people from the Occupy movement and elsewhere who've joined in to help those that were caused distress by Hurricane Sandy, but also people who chipped in any fashion, in any way that they could to be able to see that help would arrive, food would arrive, clothing would arrive. Part of that, most recently, an organization by the name of Music for Occupy, Jason Samuel, the creator of that, decided to work with musicians in the industry to do a concert, the benefit concert being the Sandy Relief Concert, which is going to be taking place at the Brooklyn Bowl on December 18th. Now, we're fortunate today to have with us a leading musician and entertainer for that venue, a fellow by the name of Immortal Technique, known among us.
How you doing?
Well, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, once upon a time known as Philippe Cornell, right?
Felipe, yeah.
Right, and he is a revolutionary, born in Peru, immigrated to Harlem by way of life's paths. He ended up in prison. He left there with a new focus on music. You might say that he's an aggressive by way of style. He's created amazing notoriety as a battle rapper. And he's heard about primarily by word of mouth. So we're happy today on 15 Minutes of Fact to add to that word of mouth by introducing you to this gentleman, what he's doing as part of this Occupy Sandy concert, and what the importance is of music for something called revolution. So welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. Now, how should I address you? As Immortal or Felipe?
Tech, whichever one.
Tech is fine?
Felipe.
Okay,
Yeah.
Tech. Well, I want you to know we're pleased to have you on, and I'd like to know, really, considering your, shall we say, colorful background, the fact that you combine activism with music, what got you into that world to begin with?
I just think it's funny the way you put that. Colorful background. We're such a musical people that but I think I'll just answer that question interestingly without being provocative or humorous, because the fans want to hear some honesty. And I think I'll be very honest in saying that this was the last thing on my mind in terms of a career choice. I mean, I could always rhyme since I was about 9 years old, but I did it because it was just part of the culture. It wasn't like I had dreams of monetizing all of this and becoming a star. I more than anything else just loved hip-hop music, and it dawned on me when I came out of prison that I finally had all of these things put together, these songs, these ideas, these concepts. And when I came out, things were pretty hard. It was difficult to find a job. Nobody wanted to hire an ex-con, especially not one that's been to prison for a violent offense, aggravated assault. So I think that, to me, it was challenging to be introduced to the work field, to be under the impression that you have freedom, but then realize that freedom is limited, and the degrees of freedom that you have. Even in prison, you can have less freedom than normal. You can be placed in the hole in the restricted housing unit where you don't see the sun, and you're in there for 23 hours a day. I mean, if you can imagine degrees of freedom in jail, even, or in prison, then, I think it kind of forces you to open your mind. Or numb it to the point that you don't care about anything. But for me, it was more an experience that I said, I have to learn something. If I don't take away anything from this, then I wasted my time, inside a cell.
Well, you brought that experience out into the light of day, and you began your music, and you still have in you the desire to be, and I use this in a very positive sense, a rebel, to be someone who wants to see things change. How does that compare to what your experience is of the Occupy movement in general?
Well, I mean, I think in the very beginning people were confused about what Occupy stood for or what the goal was, but, to me it was very evident. You know, to me, even the demonizations of Occupy were the things that defined it very clearly for the opposition that was willing to read between the lines. You know, when people went down there and they said, oh, it's just a bunch of homeless people, I was like, oh, yeah, homeless people. You mean like people that were swindled out of their homes and now are homeless with their entire family? You mean like those type of homeless people, the victims of predatory lenders who knew exactly what they were doing because they've been doing this for decades, or some innocent homeowner who just came in trying to give a better life to his family? Oh, it's nothing but drug addicts. Oh, you mean like people that have a disease, and instead of having that disease affected are part of the prison industrial complex, unless they're part of some legacy or some aristocratic wing of American society, because then they're drug addicts. You know what I mean? Then they're people who need help. They're not just, you know, human trash that can be thrown by the wayside. You mean those type of people? Because there's some very, very important things to address within the social construct of a movement like that. You know, whether it's an individual who feels like his government's disenfranchised his voice, or whether they're people that just feel like democracy is something that the United States is lacking, wherefore it's become more of like an economic aristocracy. You know, not everybody can be president. I think that's the myth that's sold to us. You know, it's not like Barack Obama came independently out of, you know, the slums of Chicago to become the president of the United States. No, he was groomed at a very young age. People believed in him. People invested a lot of money in him. And I think that, you know, local elections are really where we can have the most amount of change. But at the same time, you know, being that we start locally, and that whenever I visit an Occupy site, whether it's in Maryland, whether we're in, you know, Washington, D.C., whether we've gone down to Miami, anywhere, what I've seen and what affected me the most was realizing how tailored to the local community a lot of it was, and how difficult a lot of it was, you know, because there were people who, you know, had no other place to be. There were people who were struggling with addiction there that had to be said, hey, man, you can't do that here. You have to be removed. We love you, but you got to go. You can't taint the organization with this. You know, to see democracy in action that way.
Well, you know,
of course, it's easy to get frustrated with democracy. It's easy to get frustrated with people's voices and say, all right, everyone shut up. We're just going to do this because this is what's important and what I think is best. But that's not the people. You know, that's not we the people.
Well,
that's,
you know,
I make the rules and you fucking follow them.
Well, what strikes me also about the fact that you visited Occupy sites and you saw with your own eyes, you just didn't take it at whatever it is that you read in the newspaper or listened to on mainstream media. But what strikes me about the fact of you as a musician going to this is the fact that music and revolution has always gone hand in hand. And I believe that almost from the very beginning there were people writing songs about Occupy, just like back in the days in 1776 they sang Yankee Doodle Dandy. So what do you think that music plays? What role do you think you play in this social movement, this fabric?
I mean, I think that for me, I've served as a reminder of people that hip-hop is culture. It's not just music. You know, that it stands for something, that it's still an art form that's viable to challenge, you know, these social constructs, you know, that it has a voice beyond just discussing the self-absorbed reality of what it is. You know, I don't expect praise or support from liberal institutions who benefit the most from what I do, because I've never gotten any from them, to be honest. You know, maybe a little pat on the back or, hey, thank you very much for doing it. But they're just as guilty of doing all of this as well, because they vote with their money to back up sure things like the cookie-cutter idea of what the industry is. You know, the majority of people who are in music are liberal to some extent, but they vote with their money, because that's exactly what they've turned the music industry into. And it's a shame, because they don't realize how badly they cause a caricature of people of color. If you did that to anybody else in this country, if you depicted them by one tiny, small, demeaning aspect of who they are, you would be shut down in a heartbeat, you know? If you look at the roles that we're forced to play in music and the roles that we're forced to play in movies, I think that it really does speak to the soul of America, because anybody else, you wouldn't tolerate that from them. But, you know, it's easy to make a victim out of the people that have the least control over the music, and that is, unfortunately, the people who invented it, Black and Latino people. So You know, I don't expect nothing from anybody. Excuse me. I
Well,
don't expect anything from anybody.
well, I know one thing.
We've done this extremely well on our own, and you know, I'm not angry at nobody, but I'm just telling you that the way that I've had to do this in terms of independence has definitely shaped the attitude that I have. And
Well,
saying, hey,
well,
man, you know what? Help isn't coming. We got to do it ourselves.
Well, Tech, let's take a look at that. Your parallels as a black artist and the parallels of Occupy are really striking when you realize that both of you, and I'm talking to you in the broader sense of the word, both parties have resisted the money. Both parties have said it's not that capitalism is so bad, it's just that the playing field is so rigged that real creative people, honest people, don't even have a chance. So obviously nobody is holding a gun to your head, and anybody else of the many musicians that'll be showing up at this the benefit, you guys are showing up because you care deeply for something. Is there anything else attached to that?
I would say that, you know, for me, it's not just that whether one system is good or one is another. I think the passion that drives me is the reality to challenge, you know, the mythology of America as well and the status quo. And the capitalist idea is part of it, that no other system exists except this. I'm not a Marxist. I'm not a Maoist. I can't sit here and lecture people on the joys of a cultural revolution that costs millions of people's lives. But what I can say is that our experiment in capitalism in America cost millions of people's lives too. You know, whenever you go on some conservative program or you listen to them, you'll hear them rant and rave about Stalin and about the godless Hitler, because of course he wasn't a Christian, and nobody in Nazi Germany was a Christian at that time, according to them, because that narrative doesn't really fit with theirs. But the reality is that in this capitalist experiment, we've cost people millions of lives as well. You know, the slave trade was the capital for capitalism. That cost more lives than the Cultural Revolution in China. The genocide of indigenous people. I'm sorry, we just can't give you a break for that. And I think that, you know, setting up some casinos is like, you know, putting a Band-Aid on someone dying of polonium radiation. You know, I think at some point, these are the things that fuel my passion as well. When a child comes up to me and asks me these ridiculous questions like, hey, man, you know, was Columbus really a hero? And I'm thinking to myself, you should really know the answer to that. And then I realize, well, damn, of course you don't, because you've been spoon-fed a lie your entire life. It's the same thing, you know, I try to be a lot more open-minded when I meet people that come from a different demographic, from middle America, blindly conservative, you know, grew up in a completely different environment. Of course, it's not even like I fault you for being racist. The only real contact that you've had with people of color are through television and movies and rap videos. So if you saw that, then what other impression would you have of us than not a pyramid builders, but of a bunch of savages that walk around, because that's how we're continuously depicted.
Well,
and I think the independent scene is the only way where we can get away from those stereotypes and those disgusting racist caricatures that continue to be fomented, not just by the right, I'm sorry to say, but also by white leftists that speak with their money. I'm saying, don't tell me what you value. Show me what you spend your money on. I'll tell you what you value. Don't tell me what you love. Show me what you spend your time on. I'll tell you what you love. You know what I mean? I tell you right now, I've never ran away from a fight. I won't run away from a fight from those motherfuckers either.
Tech, I can tell what you love. Because you're telling me that quite literally. Let me talk about the fact of the peacemaking aspects of this. Many people say, Occupy, it does so little to change things. Good independent rappers are musicians, they do so little to change things. I mean, is it really possible that you would go to a conference and you'd raise a bunch of money and you'd make it available to Occupy? Is that going to make a difference anyway?
It's going to make a difference in the people's lives who we give it to around Christmas time, because no one else is coming to help them.
Yep.
FEMA ain't coming. You know?
Yep.
They're the Grinch that stole Christmas. What do you want expecting them? I just told you, my mentality is, hey, you know what? I'm sorry. Help is not on the way. We got to do this. You know, maybe it's I've had people say, hey man, that's a very libertarian approach, you know, of saying, hey, you know, we're going to do it ourselves and we don't want help from the federal government. And blah, blah, blah. Hey, that's one aspect of it. The other one is just basically this, that rather than relying on the goodwill of a government that's ruled by corporations, if we can shame them into action by saying, look how much we did and this is just us.
Yep.
Why do people obey your ridiculous laws? Why do people pay attention to you when you speak and you pretend to be a moral authority in government? Now, listen, if this post goes up anywhere and it's live online, it'll be full of pseudo-intellectual comments from people saying, oh, what are we supposed to do? You know, get rid of the government? This guy wants to live in the woods. No. I think the reality that we're trying to say is that you become so blinded to the status quo that you think it's normal. You know, the same way after 9/11, politics shifted so much to the right that what used to be center became wildly leftist. What used to be conservative became, you know, somewhere in the middle. And now that people have used up the political capital of that, and the logos doesn't even match the argument, that's shifted back towards the left slightly. Well, but I would say only in mirror images of social issues, not of the primary political objectives nationally and on the international stage of the United States of America, which I think I'm still very interested in addressing. And I've seen people in Occupy addressing that, whereas I won't see that in the Democratic Party, which is what attracted me to those ideas. Well, saying, hey, man, we need to question this. If this is a real democracy, you know, Jeremy, shouldn't we all be able to vote as a unit whether we go to war or not? Our lives are going to be sacrificed.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm voting
rich politicians who run this country. You know, it's not just to say, hey, we're all going to get together and vote, you know, 25 times every century, and that's a democracy, because that's not the truth.
Well, Tech, you have said a good piece in our 15 Minutes of Fact that is going to be getting out there. There will be people making comments on it. Hopefully this will turn into...
Get mad, get angry, get angry at something. Maybe it'll motivate you to change.
Maybe you'll actually do something about it. So
there you go, man.
I want people to be able to know more about you. I know that you have a website, viperrecords.com.
Yes, sir.
And if people were to reach you, would you want me to put out your email address?
Get me at info@viperrecords.com.
Info@viperrecords.com. Okay, good.
Yes, sir.
And also, they're going to be hopefully ponying up a suggested donation of $15 to attend the Sandy Relief Concert, which is taking place at the Brooklyn Bowl on December 18th. Can you name any of the other musicians that are going to be there? Not formed up yet?
We're still waiting on the final lineup, but when we do have that, I definitely will forward it to you and just about everybody else. You know, it'll be mostly comprised of a lot of local independent cats and maybe a few independent, you know, hip-hop.
Well, this is partly the brainchild.
I know that maybe have a little bit more, but it's not so much about the names as it is about. You're right, about the final objective of all this, which is to say, yes, there are people still left between the cracks.
Absolutely.
Yes, you know, FEMA came in. Yes, you know, the presidency was decided by this in a lot of people's eyes, but there are still people who don't have homes. There are still people who are struggling. There are still people who are going to be, you know, without power or will be living in a shelter at the end of the year.
Well, I want to thank you.
In the richest country in the world.
You're going to...
In the shining imperial capital of the richest country in the world. If we can't do anything to help the people who have been struck by this, then what the fuck are we doing?
It's a greater shame. That's why I want to thank you. I want to thank Jason Samuel and his organization, Music for Occupy, for gathering together the talent to be able to make a difference in people's lives. It's like the story about the guy who's walking with a friend on a seashore after a huge storm, and there were a bunch of those little starfish lying on the beach, and ever so often the guy would pick up a starfish and throw it back out to sea. And there were
I remember that.
thousands of them, of these starfish. And the guy says, why are you bothering doing that? That won't make any difference. And the guy says, well, it will for that starfish.
No, you're right. I mean, I went down to Occupy during, like, the first months of it really being active. And saw a lot of honesty. And this is before people who were just trying to co-opt the movement came in. But I saw them enter the foray. And what I saw there was, a lot of holy anger. They weren't destroying the city. They weren't ripping it apart. And which is why I felt like the characterizations and the demonizations of Occupy did nothing but strengthen it. You were saying, oh, these people are trying to wreck the city. Hey, homie, we had an army of 20,000 people march through, New York daily, practically, at its height. If we wanted to destroy the city, we would have. The only people who hurt anybody else were police officers, and they were shamed on a national platform for tear gassing and pepper spraying unarmed women.
Yeah, I sure do.
Another worthy foe vanquished by the white shirts of New York City. Are you kidding me?
No, I want to extend an invitation, by the way, to all the members of the police department to please join in at this conference and this wonderful concert that's coming up.
Hey, and you know what? I have nothing against good cops.
No, I don't either.
Corrupt ones.
I love the good ones.
Listen, let me tell you something. The corrupt ones, that's not just the corrupt ones. Those are the ones that look the other way when their partner or their peoples are corrupt. You're a part of that too. Just letting you know.
Yep.
Well, if I'm there when someone commits a murder, I'm going to jail too. You know what? Why doesn't the law apply to you that way? I find that very interesting. But that's another topic for another day, my friend.
Well, it sounds to me like we are going to have to do another, not 15 minutes, but more like
35 minutes.
More like 15 hours. Well, Tech, thank you once again. And this is Jerry Ashton with WGRNradio.com signing off. Again, 15 minutes of fact and peace to you. Bye.